Hi, everybody. Welcome back. This is our series of videos with gender diverse faith leaders. I am so glad to be here today with Rabbi Elliot Kukla, who is part of the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you. So glad to be with you.
Could you tell us a little bit, Elliot, about could you describe your gender identity to us? And could you give us a little bit about your faith background?
Sure. So I am a transgender and non-binary rabbi, and I was the first ordained by mainstream movement rabbi, and I was ordained by the Reform movement in 2006. And I currently work at the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center, which is a nonprofit, and we serve people all across the Jewish spectrum around issues of grieving, illness, and dying.
Great. It's really important work. I'm glad you've got good people doing it.
Thank you. I feel very lucky.
Could you tell us a little bit about your faith background? Did you grow up Jewish?
I grew up culturally Jewish with strong cultural identity. My father was a hidden child during the Holocaust. He was born in 1941 in Belgium. And I always had a very strong sense of my cultural Jewish identity, but I was not raised with any Jewish practices.
Mm-hmm.
Parents were hippies, so I was raised with like everything but Judaism, basically. And I came to Jewish practice when I was a teenager.
Cool. And how did you end up getting ordained?
Oh, how did I end up getting ordained? Well, I just sort of naturally found myself drawn to Jewish leadership. And there was a real need for queer Jewish leadership in Toronto at the time in the 90s. There wasn't a lot of, Toronto is a very progressive city, but not so much Jewishly.
Mm-hmm.
So there was definitely a real need for a queer voice. And then what I didn't really expect was that I ended up coming out as trans the same year that I was ordained. So I'd been out as queer since I was 15. But then I came out as trans in 2006, which was the same year that I was ordained, which was, I didn't plan it. It ended up being as I came into my identity as a rabbi, realizing that I was also becoming into my gender identity. Mm-hmm. So that's very surprising and exciting and terrifying. At the time, there was I had a colleague who was the first person to be accepted to rabbinical school out as trans, but nobody had been ordained as a rabbi yet. So it was definitely like fresh, new territory to figure out what that would look like, and no one really knew how the Jewish community would respond to us. And I've been very, very lucky to find my way to the Bay Area and be working in a really embracing, wonderful community for most of my career.
That's awesome. So one of the questions I want to ask is, what spiritual practice or story from your particular tradition, or what text has been most important for you? Like, what do you connect with most when you think about your gender journey?
That's a great question, and a difficult question, not like a off-the-top question. There is a text from the Mishnah, which is the very earliest layer of what becomes Jewish law from like the 1st or 2nd century. So it's like a 2,000-year-old text. And they're talking about the tumtum, which is one of the genders beyond male or female in Jewish classical texts. So not everyone realizes, but there are actually 6 genders in Judaism. There's male and female, and then there are 4 other genders beyond binary. And in this conversation about the tumtum, they're having a conversation, the 2 rabbis, and they're saying in some ways a tumtum is like a man, in some ways a tumtum is like a woman. And then there is one rabbi comes in with the opinion and says, actually the tumtum, he is a created being of her own. Mm. It's beautiful mixed grammar, and it also is referring to the tumtum as just a completely unique being in God's image. And it really speaks to me for myself, but really for all humans, that, none of us are fully definable. And one of the blessings for me of having worked as a trans rabbi the whole time I've been ordained as a rabbi, is having that lens on humans in general, that each of us really is a uniquely created being that gender brings to the surface. But for all of us, there is that struggle of how do we be the exactly uniquely created being that we were meant to be, which is a struggle for most of us. And I feel lucky that being surrounded by trans and non-binary people, I have some tools for talking about that. And that text is just such a beautiful example that 2,000 years ago, the rabbis were seeing that as well.
Yeah, it's important to remember that, gender diverse people are not a new thing. We've existed for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the amazing things about these texts is that the vision of non-binary figures in ancient Jewish texts might not be perfect. There's a lot of misogyny in the way they're talked about. There's definitely issues, but just the fact that we exist, for me, is really profoundly nourishing to be like, there's nothing new about this. Like, here we are, the place for us in society. There is a conversation about us that is rooted and ancient.
Mm-hmm. What's one resource that you would suggest for a trans or non-binary Jewish young person? What's one resource you think would be helpful?
Transtorah.org is a website that we've put together with, it needs to be updated, but it has a lot of rituals and text studies. It has a lot of things by myself and friends of mine, grappling with Jewish tradition from a trans and non-binary perspective. So there are essays, there's text studies, there's some art, there's things like that. And it definitely, I would love to have more youth-specific resources up there, if there's any youth out there who want to get involved. But there's definitely things that would speak to young people on that. And it's just transtorah.org.
Wonderful. And I believe we have that on our Big Gender Spectrum resource list. I believe it's on there. So hopefully we can direct more people towards it. Can you tell us a little bit about what you do at the Bay Area Jewish Healing Center? Anything that you're like, where your work intersects with gender diversity?
Yeah. So my work is basically to support people spiritually around grieving, illness, dying. And I direct our spiritual care hospice program. And it is not specific to gender diversity, but I serve everyone. And also I do a lot of specific trainings for organizations that might be grappling with how do I support people, gender diverse or trans people in the hospital or in hospice, and what are the specific needs around that. Which is work that I feel really grateful to get to do, because there are specific needs that will come up. And if you think about how vulnerable it is to be in the hospital or coming to the end of life, to be seen as who we are and to have the support around that spiritually is, incredibly important. So I get to do some training and writing around those issues as well. And I also work in an amazing team with 3 other rabbis, all of whom are very queer and trans welcoming. So all of our programs really have great, we always have all gender restrooms for everything and all families. Like we run a family bereavement camp, and we've always had all gender families around. And we're able to really have a truly accessible environment around this kind of work, which is not the kind of work that is always automatically, you would assume, would be trans welcoming. It's a very welcoming environment for training, trans and non-binary volunteers who want to get involved in our hospice program as well, which is very exciting for me because I do think that often as trans and non-binary people, we get cut off from older generation. So to be able to connect younger people to older people, some of whom are, because we're here in the Bay Area, some of whom are trans themselves, and to be able to make those intergenerational connections has been a really nourishing part of my work for me. And we really need each other across those generational lines.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for the work that you do and for sharing this with us. If people want to get in touch with the Bay Area Healing Center or in touch with you if they live in the Bay Area, where can they do that?
The best thing would be to go to our website, which is just www.jewishhealingcenter.org. You can also if you are in a situation where you are needing Jewish spiritual care around someone is in the hospital or someone is in hospice, you can always call us. And our phone number is 415-750-4197.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. I really appreciate it.
Good to meet you. Take care.
Thanks. You too.
Bye-bye.